Mafia Boss didn't know the little girl whispering, "Can I sit with you?" was his daughter. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a quick favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our channel's latest videos. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support us as we continue bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means so much to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and continue the story. People spend their entire lives searching for what they have already lost, never realizing that destiny sometimes whispers instead of knocking. I had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation, watched powerful men change their opinions the moment I entered a room, and built an empire that stretched across New York without ever allowing emotion to influence a single decision. My calendar dictated every hour of every day, and solitude had become the closest thing I had to peace. That afternoon, after an exhausting series of meetings in Midtown, I dismissed my security team for 30 minutes and walked into a quiet neighborhood cafe a few blocks away. It was an ordinary place with warm lights, wooden tables, the smell of fresh coffee, and soft jazz playing through old speakers mounted near the ceiling. Nobody there expected to see Adrian Kingston sitting alone by the window. That was exactly why I chose it. For a little while, I wanted to be invisible. I ordered a black coffee and opened a folder containing documents for another investment, but I found myself staring through the glass instead of reading. Outside, people hurried past with shopping bags, parents held their children's hands, and the city moved with its usual rhythm. I had spent years believing success meant always moving forward. Yet somehow, as I watched complete strangers laugh together on the sidewalk, I felt strangely disconnected from the life surrounding me. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "Excuse me." I looked up. Standing beside my table was a little girl with light blonde hair tucked beneath a knitted winter hat. She could not have been older than 6. She held a steaming cup of hot chocolate carefully with both hands, as though protecting something precious. Her bright blue eyes met mine without fear. She smiled politely before asking the simplest question I had heard in years. "Can I sit with you?" For reasons I still cannot explain, I looked around the cafe before answering. Every other table was occupied except mine. Somewhere across the room, a woman stood near the counter speaking with the cashier while glancing toward the child every few seconds. She looked distracted, searching through her purse for something. The little girl waited patiently for my answer without taking another step. Most people avoided approaching me. Adults usually recognized my face before pretending not to. Children had no reason to fear reputations they did not understand. I closed the folder in front of me and nodded toward the empty chair. Of course. Her smile widened immediately. "Thank you, mister." She climbed onto the chair with surprising determination before carefully placing her cup on the table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked out the window exactly as I had moments earlier. Then she sighed dramatically, making me almost laugh despite myself. "Grown-ups always look lonely when they drink coffee by themselves," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Do they?" She nodded with complete confidence. "My mommy says coffee helps people wake up. I think it helps them think about sad things." I found myself smiling before I realized I was doing it. "Your mommy sounds wise." "She is." The little girl grinned proudly. "She says people smile more when somebody sits with them." I looked at the untouched coffee in front of me before meeting her eyes again. Somehow, in less than 2 minutes, this child had spoken more honestly to me than most executives had in an entire year. At that moment, I believed fate had simply handed me an unexpected conversation. I had no idea that the little girl quietly warming her hands around a cup of hot chocolate was about to change every truth I believed about my own life. Children have a remarkable way of asking simple questions that quietly expose the answers adults spend years trying to hide. Emma wrapped both hands around her cup of hot chocolate and watched tiny snowflakes drift beyond the cafe window as though the entire city had slowed down just for her. I took another sip of my coffee, surprised by how comfortable the silence felt. Most conversations in my world revolved around negotiations, expectations, or hidden agendas. Sitting across from a 6-year-old girl who seemed perfectly content simply sharing a table felt strangely unfamiliar. "Do you come here a lot?" I asked. She nodded enthusiastically. Every Saturday, after Mommy finishes grocery shopping, we always split one giant blueberry muffin because she says sharing makes it taste better. I smiled faintly. Does it? Yes. She leaned forward with complete confidence. Food always tastes better when you are not eating alone. I had no clever response to that. She continued studying me with open curiosity instead of caution. Do you have children? The question caught me completely off guard. I looked down at my coffee before answering honestly. No, at least, I do not think I do. She accepted my answer without another question, as though children naturally understood that adults sometimes carried uncertainties they could not explain. Instead, she pointed toward the folder resting beside my coffee. Is that homework? I laughed quietly, a sound I hardly recognized as my own. Not exactly. Then it must be boring. Why do you think that? Because nobody smiles while looking at papers like that. Before I could answer, I heard hurried footsteps approaching our table. Emma. A familiar voice spoke my name years before my mind accepted what my eyes were seeing. I am so sorry. I slowly lifted my gaze. The woman standing beside our table looked older than the girl I had once known, yet unmistakably the same. Her chestnut hair rested against a wool coat dusted with melting snow, and her green eyes widened the instant they met mine. Olivia Brooks. 7 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. Neither of us spoke. Emma looked from her mother to me with innocent confusion. Mommy, this nice man let me sit with him because he looked lonely. Olivia forced a polite smile, though I could see surprise, disbelief, and something much deeper fighting behind her eyes. Emma, we should let the gentleman enjoy his afternoon. Emma frowned slightly. But we were talking. Olivia gently reached for her daughter's hand. Another time. I stood instinctively. Olivia. Hearing her name aloud after so many years felt unreal. She froze for only a second before quietly answering. Hello, Adrian. The greeting sounded careful, almost fragile. There was no anger in her voice. There was only distance, the kind built one difficult day at a time. Emma tilted her head. Mommy, you know him? Olivia hesitated before offering a simple reply. A long time ago. The little girl smiled brightly. I knew it. You both looked at each other like people who forgot something. My heart tightened in a way I could not explain. Children often notice truths adults worked hard to hide. Olivia thanked me for being kind to Emma, gathered their shopping bags, and gently guided her toward the cafe door. Before stepping outside, Emma turned around and waved enthusiastically. Bye, Mr. Adrian. Maybe next Saturday you will not have to drink coffee alone. I raised my hand without realizing it. Goodbye, Emma. Olivia paused for the briefest moment before looking back over her shoulder. Our eyes met one final time through the warm cafe lights. There were countless questions inside that single glance, but she chose not to answer any of them. Moments later, they disappeared into the falling snow, leaving me alone with a coffee that had long since gone cold and a feeling I could not name, except for one undeniable truth. For the first time in 7 years, the past had walked back into my life holding the hand of a little girl whose smile felt strangely familiar. Some memories never disappear. They simply wait for one unexpected moment to remind you that time has never truly erased them. I remained in the cafe long after Olivia and Emma disappeared into the snowy afternoon. The folder beside my coffee suddenly seemed meaningless. Numbers, contracts, acquisitions, and quarterly projections had occupied my thoughts only minutes earlier. Now I could not remember a single page I had intended to review. All I could see was Olivia's expression when our eyes met. It was not anger. If anything, it looked like someone carrying a burden she had learned to hide so well that even she had forgotten what life felt like without it. I finally stood, buttoned my coat, and stepped outside. The cold December air filled my lungs as pedestrians hurried past carrying shopping bags and wrapped gifts. I looked up and down the sidewalk, half expecting to catch another glimpse of them, but the crowd had already swallowed them both. For reasons I could not explain, disappointment settled over me far more heavily than it should have. During the drive back to my office, memories I had buried years ago returned one after another. Olivia had never cared about expensive restaurants or luxury vacations. She preferred small bookstores, quiet parks, and long walks where conversations mattered more than destinations. She laughed with her entire heart, and she believed every person deserved kindness before judgment. I used to admire that about her, even if I never understood it completely. Then one day she was simply gone. No dramatic argument. No accusation. No explanation beyond a brief letter saying she needed a different future than the one I could offer. I respected her decision because I believed love meant allowing someone to leave if staying would cost them their peace. 7 years later, seeing her again reopened questions I had convinced myself no longer mattered. By the time I reached my office overlooking Manhattan, evening lights had begun reflecting across the skyline. My assistant entered with the final schedule for the following week, but I barely glanced at it before asking her to postpone everything that was not absolutely necessary the next Saturday morning. She looked surprised. I almost never adjusted my calendar for personal reasons. After she left, I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched snow settle across the city below. Emma's voice echoed inside my thoughts with unsettling clarity. People smile more when somebody sits with them. I realized I had smiled more during those 15 minutes than I had during the previous several months combined. That realization disturbed me more than any difficult negotiation ever could. The following Saturday arrived sooner than expected. I told myself I was simply stopping by the cafe because I enjoyed the coffee. Even I did not believe that excuse. I arrived 20 minutes earlier than before and chose the same table beside the window. Every time the front door opened, I found myself looking up without thinking. Families entered together. Couples escaped the cold. College students carried laptops and winter scarves. But not the two people I secretly hoped to see. Nearly half an hour passed before the small bell above the entrance chimed again. I looked toward the door automatically. Emma stepped inside holding her mother's hand, her cheeks rosy from the winter air. The moment she spotted me, her face lit up with unmistakable excitement. She let go of Olivia's hand, waved enthusiastically across the cafe, and called my name with the joyful honesty only a child could possess. Olivia followed her daughter's gaze, stopped walking, and closed her eyes for the briefest moment as though she had quietly feared this exact meeting would happen again. There are moments when the heart recognizes someone long before the mind is willing to accept why. Emma hurried toward my table with the kind of excitement that could never be rehearsed. "You came back," she said, smiling as though we had been friends for years instead of strangers who had shared one conversation. I stood instinctively, unable to stop myself from smiling in return. I suppose I did. She looked proudly toward her mother. "See, Mommy? I told you he liked this place too." Olivia approached more slowly, her composure calm on the surface, though I noticed the slight hesitation in every step. She offered me a polite nod. "Good afternoon, Adrian." "Good afternoon, Olivia." Emma looked between us again before laughing softly. "You both keep saying hello like people on television." Olivia let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "That is because grown-ups sometimes forget how to talk normally." Emma accepted that explanation without question before pointing toward the empty chair across from me. "Can we sit with you again?" Olivia immediately shook her head. "Emma, we should not interrupt." I looked at Olivia instead of the little girl. "You are not interrupting anything." She studied my face for a few silent seconds, perhaps searching for a reason to refuse, but eventually she pulled out the chair beside her daughter and sat down. For the next 20 minutes, the conversation belonged almost entirely to Emma. She talked about school, her favorite library books, the snowman she wanted to build if enough snow fell, and her dream of becoming a veterinarian because, as she explained with complete sincerity, animals cannot tell people where they hurt, so somebody has to learn how to understand them. I listened more than I spoke. Olivia occasionally corrected Emma's manners or reminded her not to speak with her mouth full while sharing another oversized blueberry muffin. Watching them together felt strangely familiar, almost comforting. They moved through ordinary moments with effortless warmth, and I found myself wondering how many years of life I had traded away while chasing success that never felt complete. When Emma excused herself to wash her hands, an unexpected silence settled over the table. Olivia kept her eyes on the window instead of looking at me. "You did not have to come back," she said quietly. "I know. Then why did you?" I considered several easy answers before choosing the only truthful one. Because after seeing you again, pretending the past never happened no longer felt honest. She remained silent. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass, while people hurried through the afternoon, carrying wrapped presents and grocery bags. Finally, she spoke again. "Some things belong in the past, Adrian." "Do they?" She closed her eyes briefly before answering. Sometimes they have to. Before I could ask what she meant, Emma returned carrying 2 paper napkins she proudly placed beside our cups. The lady said everybody deserves a clean table. I thanked her, and she smiled as though she had accomplished something extraordinary. Olivia watched her daughter with quiet affection before gathering her coat. We should get going. We still have errands to finish. Emma looked disappointed but obeyed immediately. As they prepared to leave, she reached into the pocket of her little winter coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper covered with bright crayons. I made this yesterday, she said, handing it to me. It was a simple drawing of 3 people sitting around a small cafe table beneath a smiling sun, even though it had been snowing outside. Above the picture she had written in uneven block letters, "Friends share tables." My chest tightened in a way I could not explain. Olivia noticed the drawing and looked genuinely surprised. Emma, when did you make that? The little girl smiled innocently. Last night. I thought Mr. Adrian might come back. Olivia lowered her eyes without another word. As they walked toward the door, I looked down once more at the colorful drawing resting in my hands, unaware that the smallest gift I had received in years was quietly leading me toward the greatest truth I had never imagined. The truth rarely announces itself all at once. More often, it arrives one quiet detail at a time until there is no room left for denial. I kept Emma's drawing on the corner of my desk throughout the following week. Every time I looked at the uneven letters or the 3 smiling figures sitting around a small cafe table, I found myself asking the same question. Why had Olivia looked so frightened the moment she saw me again? The answer was not going to appear through speculation, and I had no intention of invading anyone's privacy. Late Thursday afternoon, I asked my attorney, Daniel Hayes, to stop by my office. Daniel had worked beside me for nearly 15 years, and he understood one rule better than anyone. If I requested information, it had to be obtained legally, ethically, and through public records alone. When he arrived, I handed him a small piece of paper with Olivia's full name written across the top. I need public information only, I said. No private investigators. No surveillance. No shortcuts. Daniel looked at the note before raising an eyebrow. Personal matter? I nodded once. Very. He accepted the assignment without another question. 2 days later, he returned carrying a thin folder. There is not much, he admitted. She has kept an exceptionally quiet life. I opened the folder slowly. Olivia had worked as an elementary school teacher for nearly 6 years. She volunteered twice a month at the neighborhood library reading to children. She rented a modest apartment less than 15 minutes from the cafe where we had met again. There were no lawsuits, no financial troubles, no public controversies, and no indication that she had ever remarried. Daniel pointed toward one final document. There is one thing that stood out. I studied the page carefully. Emma Brooks. Date of birth. My eyes stopped moving. I read the date once. Then again. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly unable to hear the city outside my office windows. Emma had been born only 8 months after Olivia disappeared from my life. Daniel continued speaking, unaware of the storm unfolding inside my thoughts. The birth certificate lists only her mother. The father's information was never publicly recorded. I looked up slowly. No father listed. He shook his head. Nothing in the public record. After he left, I remained alone in my office until darkness settled across Manhattan. I replayed every memory I still carried from those final weeks with Olivia. We had not ended our relationship because we stopped loving each other. We ended it because she believed my world had become too dangerous, too demanding, and too complicated for the future she wanted. At least that was what I had always believed. My eyes returned to Emma's birth date. The numbers refused to leave my mind. They fit together too precisely to dismiss as coincidence, yet I refused to let hope outrun reason. Coincidences existed. Assumptions destroyed lives. I folded the public records carefully and locked them inside my desk before looking once more at the child's colorful drawing. Friends share tables. A simple sentence written in bright crayons had somehow become connected to questions that had remained buried for 7 years. I promised myself one thing before leaving the office that night. I would not accuse. I would not speculate. And I would never force answers from someone who did not wish to give them. But if fate had truly brought Olivia and Emma back into my life for a reason, then I owed all 3 of us the patience to discover the truth one honest conversation at a time. Hope is a dangerous thing when it arrives before certainty, because every unanswered question begins to sound like a promise. The following Saturday, I returned to the cafe carrying nothing except patience. I had spent the entire week reminding myself that public records could suggest possibilities, but never prove them. I refused to build expectations on assumptions, especially when a child's future could be affected by my emotions. The familiar bell above the cafe door rang just after 10 o'clock, and moments later Emma hurried inside beside Olivia, brushing tiny snowflakes from her pink winter coat. The instant Emma spotted me, her face brightened with the same genuine excitement I had already begun looking forward to. "Mommy, he came back again," she whispered loudly enough for half the cafe to hear. I stood as they approached. Olivia smiled politely, though I could see the quiet uncertainty she was trying to hide. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." Emma climbed into the chair across from me without waiting for permission this time. "I knew this was becoming your favorite cafe." I laughed softly. "You might be right." She grinned proudly, convinced she had solved another mystery. We talked about school projects, Christmas decorations, and the drawing contest her class had won the previous afternoon. Emma spoke with endless enthusiasm, while Olivia listened with the calm patience only a devoted mother seemed capable of carrying. Watching them together, I realized something that had escaped me before. Emma smiled exactly the way Olivia used to whenever she became excited about something small. It was not simply resemblance. It was familiarity. After a while, Emma asked if she could choose another blueberry muffin from the display case. Olivia reached for her purse, but I quietly stood first. "Allow me." She hesitated. "Adrian, you do not have to." "I know." Emma looked up at her mother hopefully. Olivia finally nodded. "One muffin. And remember to say thank you." Emma hurried toward the counter while I waited beside her. She carefully counted the cookies arranged behind the glass before deciding that the blueberry muffin still looked happiest. As the cashier prepared the order, Emma looked up at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She lowered her voice as though sharing an important secret. "Do you think people can miss somebody even if they have never met them before?" The question caught me completely unprepared. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged gently. "Sometimes when I look at people, it feels like I already know them. Mommy says the heart remembers things that the brain does not understand yet." I stared at the little girl for a long moment, unable to find an immediate answer. Finally, I smiled. "Your mother says many wise things." Emma accepted the muffin with both hands before we returned to the table together. A few minutes later, she asked if she could visit the small reading corner near the front of the cafe while she finished her snack. Olivia agreed, leaving the two of us alone for the first time since our paths had crossed again. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Finally, I looked at Olivia and chose my words with great care. "I learned something this week." She slowly lifted her eyes toward mine. "About what?" "About Emma." The color faded from her face almost instantly. She gripped the handle of her coffee cup without taking a sip. I kept my voice calm and gentle. "Only public information. Nothing more." She closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. There was no anger inside them, only exhaustion, as though she had spent years preparing herself for this conversation. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Then I suppose it is time we stopped letting the past decide our future. Some truths do not break your heart because they are painful. They break it because deep inside, you already knew they were waiting for you." Olivia remained silent long after her final words settled between us. The gentle sounds of coffee cups, quiet conversations, and holiday music continued around us, yet the entire cafe suddenly felt impossibly distant. I looked toward the small reading corner where Emma sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, completely absorbed in a picture book. Every few moments, she smiled at the illustrations before carefully turning another page. She had no idea that the two adults she trusted most were standing on the edge of a conversation capable of changing all three of our lives forever. Olivia followed my gaze. "She does not know," she said softly. "She has never known." I nodded slowly. "I have not come here to take anything away from her." Olivia finally looked directly into my eyes. "I believe you." Hearing those words from her after 7 years carried more weight than any business agreement I had ever signed. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup before continuing. "The day I left, I had already discovered I was pregnant." My heart stopped for a moment. I did not interrupt. She deserved the chance to tell her story without fear of being questioned. I wanted to tell you, she whispered. I drove to your office twice. I even stood outside your building one afternoon. Her voice trembled slightly before becoming steady again. Then I watched reporters surrounding the entrance. Cameras followed every step you took. Every newspaper seemed to have another story about your business empire, your influence, and the dangers surrounding your life. I looked at the world you carried on your shoulders, and I became terrified that our child would inherit those dangers before she even learned how to read. I lowered my eyes, allowing every word to settle inside me. You decided alone. She nodded once, tears quietly gathering without falling. I convinced myself I was protecting both of you. I believed you deserved the freedom to build your future without being forced into fatherhood because of one unexpected moment. And I believed Emma deserved a peaceful childhood far away from headlines and constant attention. I drew a slow breath before speaking. You should have trusted me enough to let me make that choice beside you. Olivia closed her eyes. I know. I have replayed that decision in my mind for 7 years. Neither of us spoke for several moments. There was no anger left inside me, only sadness for the years none of us could recover. Finally, I asked the question that had lived inside my heart since Daniel handed me the public records. Olivia, is Emma my daughter? She looked toward the reading corner where Emma had begun helping another little boy choose a book from the lowest shelf. The tenderness in Olivia's expression answered me before her words ever could. She turned back toward me, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. Yes, Adrian. My world became completely silent. Every ambition, every victory, every sacrifice I had ever made suddenly seemed insignificant compared to those 2 words. I looked at the little girl laughing quietly across the room, remembering the first question she had ever asked me. Can I sit with you? I swallowed hard, trying to steady a voice that no longer wished to obey me. Does she deserve certainty? Olivia nodded immediately. More than anything. I reached across the small cafe table and gently placed my hand beside hers without forcing her to take it. Then let us find the truth together, I said quietly. Not for us. For Emma. Olivia looked down at my hand before meeting my eyes once more. This time, instead of fear, I saw something I had not seen in 7 long years. Hope. The most important promises are not spoken in moments of celebration. They are made quietly, when 2 people decide that the future deserves more courage than the past. A few days later, Olivia and I met at a private family clinic recommended by Daniel Hayes. Neither of us wanted attention. Neither of us wanted rumors. We wanted only certainty. The nurse explained the simple procedure with gentle professionalism before collecting the samples needed for the DNA test. It lasted only a few minutes, yet the waiting afterward felt longer than the previous 7 years combined. During the following week, I found myself looking at the city differently. I still attended meetings. I still signed contracts. I still made decisions that affected thousands of employees. But every evening, my thoughts returned to one little girl whose laughter had somehow become the loudest sound inside my otherwise disciplined life. Olivia agreed that we should not tell Emma anything until we knew the truth beyond every possible doubt. We continued meeting at the cafe each Saturday, protecting the ordinary rhythm she loved so much. Emma never noticed the careful glances Olivia and I exchanged whenever she looked away. She only celebrated the fact that her 2 favorite grown-ups had become friends. She proudly introduced me to every drawing she made, every spelling test she passed, and every new book she borrowed from the library. Once, she asked if I wanted to help her build a snowman in the small park across the street. I had negotiated billion-dollar agreements with absolute confidence. Yet I discovered that building a crooked snowman with a 6-year-old required a completely different kind of wisdom. She laughed every time the snowman leaned sideways, insisting that perfection made people boring. Olivia watched us from a nearby bench, smiling in a way I had almost forgotten. For the first time in years, I saw peace replacing the constant caution she had carried since we met again. When the clinic finally called, Olivia and I agreed to return together. We sat side by side inside a quiet consultation room, neither of us pretending to be calm anymore. The physician entered holding a sealed envelope. He offered a reassuring smile before placing the report on the desk between us. The laboratory completed multiple verification procedures, he explained. The results are conclusive. My heartbeat became almost painfully loud. Olivia reached for my hand without thinking. I gently held hers as the physician opened the report. The probability of paternity is greater than 99.9%. No other words reached me after that. The room blurred for a moment as every memory rearranged itself into a completely different life than the one I believed I had lived. Emma had not simply reminded me of someone I once loved. She was my daughter. Olivia quietly covered her face as tears escaped despite every effort to remain composed. I wrapped my arms around her gently, not because the past had disappeared, but because we had finally stopped carrying it alone. After several quiet moments, she looked at me with red eyes and whispered, "I am sorry for every birthday you missed." I shook my head. We cannot change yesterday. I thought about Emma's drawings, her endless questions, her kindness toward strangers, and the way she believed lonely people deserved company. But we can make sure she never has to wonder again whether she is loved. Olivia nodded through her tears. Before leaving the clinic, we made one promise together. We would tell Emma the truth with honesty, patience, and reassurance. She would never feel like the center of a mistake. She would know she had always been the center of two hearts that simply needed far too many years to find their way back to her. Life has a quiet way of returning what we believed was lost forever, but only after teaching us to recognize its true value. The following Saturday, Olivia and I arrived at the cafe together for the first time. We had rehearsed the conversation countless times, yet every carefully chosen sentence suddenly felt too small for a moment that would shape Emma's life forever. She was already waiting near the window with a coloring book and a box of crayons the cafe owner always saved for her. The instant she saw us walking in side by side, she smiled with complete delight. "You came together," she announced proudly. "I knew you would become friends." Olivia and I exchanged a quiet glance before sitting beside her. Emma noticed the seriousness on our faces almost immediately. "Did something happen?" she asked gently. Olivia reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "Sweetheart, we want to tell you something important." Emma nodded with surprising patience. She had always listened with her whole heart. Olivia took a slow breath before speaking. "Do you remember when you asked me why some children have a mommy and a daddy, and some have only one parent at home?" Emma nodded again. "You said every family has its own story." Olivia smiled softly. "That is still true. And today you are old enough to hear more of your story." Emma looked at me curiously before returning her attention to her mother. Olivia continued with calm honesty. "Many years ago, before you were born, Adrian and I cared about each other very much. Then life separated us before either of us understood what was happening. I did not know how to bring us back together, and I made a decision that I believed would protect everyone." She paused before gently taking Emma's small hand. But there was one truth that never changed. Emma's blue eyes slowly turned toward me. My heart had faced impossible negotiations without trembling, yet I had never been more nervous than I was in that quiet cafe. I leaned forward just enough for her to see every emotion on my face. "Emma," I said softly, "I recently learned something that has become the greatest gift of my life. I am your father." The cafe faded into complete silence inside my mind. Emma blinked several times as she tried to understand words that were much larger than her years. She looked at Olivia first. "Really?" Olivia nodded through gentle tears. "Really?" Emma looked back at me. "You did not know?" I slowly shook my head. "No. But if I had known, I would have spent every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary Tuesday beside you." She studied my face for several quiet seconds with the careful seriousness only children sometimes possess. Then she slid off her chair, walked around the table, and stopped beside me. "Is that why you always smiled when you looked at me?" she asked. My voice almost disappeared. "I think my heart recognized you before my mind ever could." Emma smiled, wrapped both arms around my neck, and held me with every ounce of trust she carried. Then she whispered the words that healed 7 years in a single breath. "Can I sit with you, Daddy?" Tears filled my eyes before I could answer. I lifted her gently onto the chair beside mine and kissed the top of her head. "You never have to ask again," I whispered. "There will always be a place for you beside me." Olivia reached across the table and quietly took my hand while Emma leaned comfortably against my shoulder, already acting as though this had always been where she belonged. As snow drifted gently beyond the cafe windows, I finally understood that power had never been measured by the empire I built or the influence I possessed. The greatest privilege I would ever earn was hearing one little girl call me daddy, because in the end, the richest man is simply the one who finally comes home to the people who were always meant to be his family.